So thank you, everybody. Thank you to Warren and David for being here as well. Very brief introduction. My name is Brian. I have to be very careful about that. My name is Brian Mayhew. I lead academic engagement in Canada for SAS Global Academic Programs. The way that typically works, if you're not familiar with what we do, is enabling AI and analytics education in higher ed, typically through software, through training, through applied learning opportunities, which is going to make up the brunt of what we're going to talk about today. So before that, though, let me introduce the other speakers here. Dr. Warren Ritchie to my left is an assistant professor of information systems and strategy. He's also director of MSc programs at Ivey Business School. Warren has had a long career with Volkswagen, so he worked for subsidiaries around the world. Most recently was the CIO of Volkswagen Group of America. Prior to joining Ivey, he was a fellow and co-founder of CGS Advisors, a consultancy focused on the intersection of technology, business, and innovation. And if there's any Tar Heels in the room, he did his PhD at UNC Chapel Hill. David Cruikshank is Director and Head of Data Strategy and Governance at Scotiabank. He's a proven leader specializing in AI, data, and innovation at scale. David leads teams that innovate and build safely to generate value across risk and business strategic objectives. His engaging leadership style helps harness talent that bridges growth, governance, and regulation priorities, helping the bank deploy data and AI solutions responsibly. So, round of applause. Thank you both for being here. So a little bit of context setting. The partnership that we're going to talk about, and I've just realized hey, there we are.
Hey guys.
So this is the partnership that we're going to be talking about today. We've called this an innovation collaborative. And the way that this came about has been kind of the intersection of collaboration between these three organizations for a very, very long time. SAS and Scotiabank, of course, have had a long history. SAS has partnered with Ivey on a ton of teaching, learning, applied learning objectives as well. Ivey and Scotiabank had a digital innovation lab as well. So this was kind of a perfect storm of bits and pieces coming together. 10 years ago, there was an event called Ivey Hack the Case that launched. So this was a partnership between Ivey, Scotiabank, and SAS. We would give students real data. They would work on a real project using real Scotiabank data. And a couple years ago, when Warren joined the program, there was a bit of a shakeup, bit of a change in the way that we wanted this program to run and what the objectives and the outcomes would be. And so when we did that, there was a bit of a shift in, I think, what the focus was. And there was, without going into too much detail, the folks at Scotiabank who had been our partners with that, it was just something that wasn't able to continue in the same way. And so we had gone a different route temporarily. And that different route hit a bit of a dead end, very close to the launch of the competition. And so we reached out to David and said, hey, is this something you think you're interested in helping out with? And it was a bit of a Hail Mary. It was down to the wire. And not only was the answer a very enthusiastic yes, but it went off, without a hitch. It was a pretty spectacular case. So the first question that I want to ask for both of you, actually, I'll start with Warren, was when you joined and you wanted to change things up, why? What was the motivation for change in the way that competition worked?
So the original competition took existing data and students worked on pretty understandable, well understood problems on the Scotiabank side. So students were preparing things to which Scotiabank really had an understanding of what they were going to receive. We wanted to push it to the edge of how do we start getting students working on the projects that aren't as familiar with the clients? How do we start to get that edge of comfort of where they are going? And AI just brought the opportunity to be able to start to say, we want students working with clients on the things that they're not comfortable with yet, because that's the environment these students will graduate into. And so a realistic preview, working with Leading Edge to partner with these two sides to be able to put something together that pushes them to the limits, that was super desirable. So we described a stretch hackathon or a stretch hack the case event. We've renamed it now Hackathon. And we invited students from all three streams inside the MSc program, the digital management stream, the business analytics stream, the international business stream, to give some diversity in these teams so that they got to look at the problem from multiple perspectives, not just from a pure analytics perspective. So I'll stop there in terms of motivation.
And so, David, how did that fit into what you were doing at Scotiabank?
So running the labs, I run the labs kind of on a shoestring budget, and by shoestring I mean zero. So when I had the opportunity to get something for free, I typically jump at that, and anyone that knows me in this room knows that that's true. But in the end, we were really fresh into our VIA journey. For me, when I was introduced, I'll be honest, I was a little hesitant, and only because of capacity. And then when Brian told me, oh, yeah, they use SaaS VIA, I'm like, wow, we're trying to launch SaaS VIA now, and we're only a few months, the ink's still wet on the contract. So for me to get an opportunity to maybe get some fresh eyes and some fresh work on a use case that was important to us and is tied to our goals, and to do so in an environment that I'm trying to get some learnings from, to me, everything just lined up perfectly. So.
Yeah, and so at the time, I don't think you realized the scope of what was intended, and so what was it that ultimately was the trigger for you to think, okay, this is something I want to do more of, and I want to build this out?
Yeah, I can take that. For me, and I'll be honest with you, my initial thought was maybe I'll get some fresh eyes on a problem, and I can take that back, and it's an idea I can explore eventually. Maybe sometime in the lab when I have time. We have no shortage of use cases and things that we need to do. And maybe I'll circle back with some students, get some learnings on how they used VIA, and I'll take that back and just make that, and tack that onto our journey. But once I saw the quality of the work that was done, and of the POCs, and I was really blown away, I'll be honest with you. And so that kind of was really what inspired me. I'm like, this can't end at thanks for coming, and I'll see you next year for next year's hackathon. And that was really when I circled back with Warren and said, I think there's something here. Some people at Scotiabank need to see this.
Yeah.
So.
It was 6 teams, I think, out of that original hackathon that went on to do the projects?
Yeah, so we had 20-something teams, and we took the top 6, I believe it was.
Yeah, 18 became 6 that moved on.
Okay.
Yeah, so Warren, this fit ultimately into the way that you've built out the field projects that you run at Ivy. So can you kind of walk us through what that looks like?
Yeah, it's been a long-standing, and I think maybe David's had the experience working with either us or other academic institutions. But projects do a piece of work, and that's great, but it's a long way from implementation. It is just a great piece of ideation that ends up in a PowerPoint slide or maybe a video. What we wanted to do is start string term-by-term activities together so themes could mature with project teams to get closer to implementation. So ideation in the hackathon, then proofs of concept, then start to continue to mature the idea, getting it closer to implementation. Progressively, it gets more absorbed inside the client's organization, inside Scotiabank, to working with your teams. But that idea of stretching it out and really starting to think about an end-to-end allows us to start to think about this as an experiential platform that students start at the beginning and run for 16 months. And that's huge value proposition from the academic perspective. It allows us to really think about curriculum renewal, which is a challenge inside academic institutions to get everybody on board with curriculum renewal. This was a mechanism to do that.
Yeah. And so these projects, I mean, you kind of alluded to the way the projects used to work, where they were fairly static data analytics projects. These new projects are more like live, real business problems that David, I mean, it's a kind of a paragraph that you bring to the table and said, look, this is a challenge that this is our day-to-day. Here's some data, figure it out. So what did that look like for you when you were designing that out and then getting those insights?
Yeah, so first off, we have to make sure that anything that's done, we really put and the students probably aren't used to this, and this is part of the real world experience that they get, is we do have to put them in a sandbox, right? Like there has to be guardrails. Like they're not going out and developing things in OpenAI and all these. So when we do that, we have the use cases. I have to be able to match use cases with maybe like directors, people that are used to managing people, that own those problems and have the capacity to manage an Ivy team off-site. And then to do so and pick use cases that we have the technology that we can solution. We got a million ideas, but it's all about enablement, right? So I think that was kind of like my role in that and setting that up. And then, but to be able to move it and transition from one cohort to another, really that's kind of the special sauce in all of this, is to be able to move it down the field. Because to give me, let's say, I say me as in Scotiabank, a use case and a POC that was worked on for 3 months and give it to me, it's going to sit on the shelf. Like, it's going to get forgotten because I don't have the capacity to move it further down the field, or else I wouldn't give it to Ivy to do in the first place. So I think that was kind of like the thinking when we say, like, we got to continue to, we need 12 months, I guess, is what I'm getting at. So.
And so that ended up fitting into what you were planning out, because I know with the framework that you've been putting together, it does have that continuity built into it, where you want the teams to actually not only deliver, but they're now part of the ideation process in the beginning. They're now part of potentially the implementation process as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a bit of shock for the students when they first move into working on the projects directly with the Scotiabank business areas. And I get the emails and the whatever saying, what's going on? They want this, they want that, they want all these things. And the messaging initially is, let it settle in and let's see where you are in 2 or 3 weeks. And then they come back and they're feeling engaged, they're feeling valued, they're getting past that initial shock. But that's what we want them to go through, because we want them to have that sort of hardening or resiliency being built in when it's pretty much riskless in terms of an academic grade or a team environment. Then when they move into the real world, they are in fact resilient, or they are much more resilient. And that's our goal, to make this whole thing seem like it's a real process.
And the data is terrible, so that's also real.
I constantly think back to the moment we did the client call. So we would structure where they would do a workshop, they would get some training, they would then do a client call, maybe an office hour or two, and the client call was a very efficient process. So rather than have 100 students connect with David on a Zoom call and try to pepper him with questions live, it was like, send us the questions ahead of time, and he would get 30 minutes to go through them. And a lot of the questions last year, because there were some issues with the quality of the data that we had, and there were a lot of questions saying, like, oh, there's some anomalies in here, or this looks a little bit weird, or why does this person, say they've had an account for 40 years, but they were born in 2006? And the answer was, that's real life, right? If it's somebody who's transcribing data or putting it into a system, it's going to be messy. And so I think that building this out so that students are not only used to, okay, maybe a framework for what this might look like in the transition to the workforce, but also like, here's some of the crap that you're going to see along the way, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So from your perspective, David, at Scotiabank, what kind of business outcomes have emerged or that you anticipate emerging?
So, a lot of this, there's success and failure, right? So we had 6 teams. That doesn't mean I'm going to get 6 use cases put into production. But we do have a couple that have, and again, we're only a year into this. So like, we're literally starting our 2nd year like last week. Mm-hmm. So in projects and AI-driven projects, and that need to be integrated into platforms, and that like those take time. And when I think about the business outcomes, I can't really quantify benefits, but we do have some that are now pushed out to project teams at Scotiabank and at Tangerine, which is Scotiabank's digital bank. So they are moving further down the field, and so that is a success. But we're also building, obviously, talent pipelines, and we're getting students into the workforce, and hopefully Scotiabank, fingers crossed, that have the skill sets and are using the technology that we use every day, right? So to me, the outcomes are more around like talent development, talent pipeline, building a culture, as opposed to like, like we launched this and we got like, we'll have that, so come see me in 2 years, but we don't. Those are the outcomes we have right now.
Yeah. No, that's fair. And then Warren, from Ivy's perspective, how are you determining the value of this?
So, realistic preview of what to expect when they move out, being challenged beyond their coursework to work on those sort of realistic projects. Also, the students are taught about innovation funnels and ideation. There's lots of ideas, only a few actually make it through. To be part of that process by which an idea gets retired or sunset or put on the shelf and really live it and understand the criteria and be part of that development process, that's super outcomes. Students emerge more confident. They are more confident in interviews. They are more optimistic about their opportunity to have an impact in organizations in their early career. We've gone from the idea that students hope to have some value demonstrated some way in their early career, and eventually they start to get an opportunity to do something impactful in the organizations. The students graduating with the expectation they can be impactful immediately. And that's what we're trying to get them to, so that they are putting up their hands and wanting to be involved with things because they've gone through the process of seeing how it actually works. So those are our criteria. They're still kind of soft criteria, but it comes back in the feedback I get from students around this stuff. They want to be part of this program. They compete to get into it, they compete in it, and then they are absolutely rewarded by the opportunity to show their stuff later on.
So there's value for Ivey, like the organization as well.
Absolutely. As I said earlier, this is curriculum renewal. It is business school, like all organizations, have a certain degree of inertia. Getting curriculum renewal through the traditional faculty renewal process has a pace, and it's at faculty preference, and that's not wrong, that just is. But through these sort of co-curricular experiential platforms where there's a lot more degrees of freedom for me to be able to work with clients and say, what do you really need? How can we structure it? That is really building a curriculum renewal process. So the top of our funnel in terms of innovation is always leading edge problems inside organizations that they're not sure how to grapple with. That's what we're trying to do. And that keeps us relevant, which is always our big concern from a business school perspective. Rigor we got lots of. Relevance is always that's the thing we always get a little bit worried about.
Do you think that these types of projects, are they changing the way that these students are thinking about what their future career might be?
Oh, I think so. I think that it opens their mindset to more roles. Now, there's changes taking place without a doubt in the business analytics stream and the digital management stream. They are becoming the same stream. Digital management are creating the analytic inside, using vibe coding to create little mini analytics platforms that they're using to look at data and coming away. And so the notion of these specialized streams, they're becoming general management streams of the future. This is what general managers will be doing in the future, is self-enabling themselves with AI agents to do things that they previously had specialists in the organization to do. We want our students in these specialty programs to stop thinking about themselves as specialists when they emerge and start thinking about themselves as general managers who are prepared to move up quickly. That's the mindset that we're trying to put in place.
Right. And we saw this, so the latest iteration of the hackathon finished on Thursday last week, I think, and then we basically pivoted immediately and came down here. And we saw quite a lot of that in these projects. So before I dive into maybe explaining it, Warren, why don't you explain how the hackathon ran this year, just with the organizations that were involved, but specifically the AI focus?
This year, again, we wanted encourage students from multiple streams to get together, so we have the diversity of outlook, digital with analytics, with international business. But we wanted them to use vibe coding, to hear a client challenge statements. We don't work off problem statements, we work off sort of client challenges, which are very light briefs around think this way, and we wanted vibe coding. We wanted them to answer a few questions in a very few slides about background and methodology and this sort of stuff, so that we sort of have a sense, because I do have to grade that in some way so that I can give them a course credit. But then we wanted them to create videos and do live demos. And that's when they really open up, and that's where the creativity really starts to come out. And it's really quite interesting. As the students start to get more and more confident with it, they are building more and more sophisticated agentic models, not things you can implement, but things that are really kind of moving storyboards about how agents are actually delivering stuff. And that's really quite compelling.
Mm-hmm. So for David, when you're there as an industry representative, somebody from Scotiabank and a sponsor of that hackathon, and you're thinking about, okay, we've now weaved these projects and these stories to include things like AI and vibe coding, everything else. How are you viewing that from the perspective of, okay, these are now my future talents. What do I really want from them?
Yeah, and I think Warren touched on it earlier, because I can get anyone to build a POC, right? So you're looking for mindset, right? Like, so by combining these different disciplines onto teams and having that mix, now you're getting like the strategic vision. They put thought into like how to implement in large organizations. So it covers more than, let's say, I would say in the past, or even other hackathons that I've participated in, where it really is a technical showcase. but I think this goes well beyond that, and I think that's the inspiration. And then with what we do with the creative part at the end, that's what really inspires. We all see a million decks, right? So when you see a bunch of students with a well thought out pitch, doing a very slick POC, but talking about the strategic part behind it and how you would but they're not going to nail it, of course, right? But the thought process, so like when I'm looking at it, like that's really when I'm thinking about what teams I want to take, and who to pair them up with and what use cases, those are the things that I think about, and that's my approach. And it's funny this year because we had multi-stream, so we had other industries as well. Typically it's Scotiabank, but we had other, and I'm like, now I was talking to you, I want to take teams from other streams because their pitches were so well done, their solutions were like basically industry agnostic. So I'm like, Warren, like, what's that team there? I need those as well. So I think that's all part of it, and that's part of that inspiration.
So that is part of the growth from last year to this year. So we did introduce healthcare and had a hospital who were interested in how do they create synthetic data as a service. We also introduced a small consulting company that has to reinvent itself because time-based, charging clients based on consultant effort, that's going away. It's based on what you've built for them and you're bidding the deliverable and then you're getting into an adaptation process. And consulting is getting really turned upside down in that sense. So 3 industries, big disruptions, all with a challenge, 2 weeks to do it. 2 weeks is intentional because we don't want you to talk yourself out of great ideas because you think it's too far out there. We want you to, you know what, you got to go with that. So it's really all about getting a diversity of thinking. And as David mentioned, students start to be able to say, you know what, between healthcare, banking, consulting, it's all disrupting. And how do we think through processes to transform organizations and at what pace? That's the learning across all the streams. And I found it particularly rewarding when David was saying, you know, that healthcare group that pitched that thing, I want to know more about how they came up with that or meet that team and that sort of stuff. So that's super rewarding.
Steal them.
From us. Yeah, steal them for a project.
I was thinking the same, actually. I wanted to approach the South Lake team and say, okay. So David, you just mentioned something about the way that hackathons used to be perceived as kind of more of a showcase. I think when we think about what career readiness means, it used to mean a checklist of, do you know this programming language? Do you know this, strategic framework, whatever it might be? So this is kind of a lofty question because it's touching on academia and these types of partnerships in general. But is this type of a framework, in your opinion, like the future of career readiness? Do we need to think about things in this sort of industry agnostic, implementing these kinds of tools?
I would hope so, but there is a lot to it, right? So a lot of things need to align, but it would be great, especially as we harden the framework and make it like last year really was a year of learning. Like Warren and I kind of fumbled our way through 2025. But there was a lot of learnings, and now we've developed a rinse and repeat framework. So this year is going to be great. But all jokes aside, hopefully maybe this inspires, and that framework inspires others. You probably don't want them to because that's your competition. But I hope that I get to see this like in a number of institutions that I deal with. So.
Well, actually, I'd love to see every institution doing that sort of academically, because then we could talk about best practices amongst the universities, and all the students benefit from that sort of collaboration around that. So we'd love to be able to work with the other business schools around how do we do that, how do we create a national program and all that sort of stuff. That would be really to the benefit of students and society, quite frankly, if we want to be really lofty about it.
Sure, yeah. Solving all of society's problems here. It's fantastic.
A dent, maybe.
So, we recognize, I think, that a lot of the times the barriers to innovation can be a cultural thing. I mean, the reality is that we're talking about a group of people who, I don't know, we were all fairly like-minded when we came together, and there was a bit of a framework in place already. That's not always going to be as salient, I think. What are your thoughts on just like, how do you make this work?
Yeah, I'm real familiar with barriers. So For me, there's two barriers. Like one's obviously cultural, and then one's going to be kind of the technical and all the things that we need to go through to get something like this. So if I talk about the cultural one first, so when and I'll just talk about my experience and how we managed to pull this off, is I took the top teams and I said, you know, I'm going to take the top two, and I know a couple of leaders that really embrace innovation, embrace kind of outside the box thinking, and I want to put them in front of that, and I'll let them do the heavy lifting on kind of getting this approved. So I had the top two teams last year pitch to two leaders in particular, and we have a lot of leaders that embrace this. These just happen to be two I know. So so they pitch, and they were just as inspired as I was, and so it was once they saw it, it was really easy to kind of get the ball rolling. But the other part is the technical part, right? So how do we get around that? So we actually leverage DataMaker, which is a data synthesizer. So we're not moving real data. We're not moving, students aren't getting access to our environment. All this is done remotely in the SAS Viya Learners platform on their Azure Blob, leveraging synthetic data. So we're able to kind of get creative in a way and how normally some of the roadblocks that would take months to years and then these things die off to do, we're able to kind of do these things more in weeks. So I would say it's definitely like you have to have like leaders that enable this, and then obviously a technology and a technology partner that helps facilitate that. So that, for me, that's basically how we got around it. And I've had experience with that in the past with the SAS Viya Innovation Lab, so taking a lot of the same approaches. So it was definitely, it's not like I thought of it because I was working with Warren. I was already kind of doing it.
Yeah. And so by that point, you're used to the systems and the way they work.
That's
you
right.
can game them, which is perfect. And so Warren, from your perspective, what are your thoughts there just around if you're thinking about maybe faculty colleagues at other institutions perhaps, what are the first steps that they can start to take?
Well, we're going to work on our own institution first in terms of getting more faculty engaged in it. But we've taken these advanced field projects, which are the follow-up projects, and take them through our curriculum approval committee. So they are now actually courses inside Ivy with faculty assigned to them. So, but it's easy for me to convince a curriculum committee and faculty to join onto these things when we've got a year of success. It's a little lumpy, to David said. We found ourselves through it, but from the students' perspective, it worked great. Behind the scenes, we knew it was kind of lumpy, but from the students' perspective, they loved it. Now faculty are starting to engage with it, and now they're seeing an opportunity to get away from our traditional case-based courses, and that's our bread and butter. We're not leaving that, but we're supplementing it with a third of the course credits in the Master of Science program being experiential learning courses, and that's way more than the MBA program or the HBA program. When we're heavily experiential, when we've got real problems that are leading-edge problems with named clients and mediators in terms of technology and the platforms and all that to help keep it all together and bring it legitimacy and stability, that becomes something that faculty want to engage in. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, I mean, through the faculty advisory board here at SAS, we're having conversations about how do we start to bring other academic colleagues potentially into this sort of model. And it will scale. You just have to find the right people who want to rethink curriculum renewal around experiential. And I think AI is the gift for that because it's the technology that you have to get your hands dirty with and really to start to understand it. You can't teach it. You've got to enable it through practice and getting your hands dirty.
It's great. Is that all, right? Like that's a...
That's a lot.
So Dave, you kind of queued up actually perfectly, and we were talking previously about just the way that the technology I think was the right fit between what we wanted to do at Ivy and what you're already doing at Scotiabank. How big an element was that?
Well, to be honest, I don't know if we weren't where we were as far as having our tech stacks aligned, and by that I mean like kind of especially with SAS Viya and Azure Blob and all of that. So if we weren't in that part of our journey, I'm not sure if I would have been able to do what I'm doing. I would have been like, we don't even have it, or whatever happens to be, and I maybe would have been a little less enthusiastic, selfishly. But yeah. So for myself, I don't know if I would have participated. So that's important, I think, number one. But then obviously being able to, and then they're like, okay, yeah, they're using a tool that we have. That's great, but there's no way I'm going to get to move data. So I think, so if we circle back to that, so, but then you're like, oh yeah, well, we have a data synthesizer. I'm like, okay, well, now I don't have to worry about that either. So I think it just made things so easy, and it definitely, like you found someone like myself that because some of those roadblocks were cleared, and it aligned strategically with where we're going with our analytics platform, that everything just kind of fell into place.
Yeah. Yeah, the synthetic data piece has been major. I mean, everybody who was in the opening session today, you saw that that's a huge component of the company strategy as well. And Warren, I mean, you designed the latest version of the hackathon to really, particularly with the health stream, the focus there was synthetic data, but it pervaded through all three streams. So what was the catalyst for you to really be like, no, synthetic data, that's the bit of the future, that's what's going to be the hinging on this?
To get more involved with experiential, we had to start to build some internal assets. So we built an innovation sandbox. It's just an Azure environment, but it's finally a place where a business school can say, students can work on data here in a secure environment. We didn't want to bring in original data, so we started to explore 3 years ago how to synthetic data. And back then, it was an expensive process through third parties to build all this sort of stuff. But through students doing research papers and finding references to creating synthetic data through AI. And so we put some students on a project to say, let's see what you can create using generative and Python, et cetera. Can you create synthetic data? And we are starting to create some reasonable versions of it. And then I've continued to develop that. When Brian introduced David and I, and they said synthetic data, and I said, well, by coincidence, we're trying to build our own capability internally so that we can have a better conversations with clients. We don't want your data, we want your metadata. And then we'll create our synthetic version of it, and we will use that to work on your project. That fit what I understand David's thoughts to being, is that synthetic data is good enough to build models. Models can be tested back with original data, and we could give our models back to the clients. Same thinking and alignment around that. So we had a data storage and handling and operating environment that we had built in anticipation of needing it. We were researching synthetic data, building prototype ways to do it, and we had the partnership with VIA. So there was a general up the stack alignment that said, you know what, all we're missing is use cases. And so that's what the hackathon did.
That's perfect. And not to pivot away from Scotiabank much, but was that a selling feature for the other organizations that you brought in from the other industries?
It is with healthcare, because healthcare wants all kinds of support, but we can only give you so much, and which is almost nothing. And so when I'm talking synthetic data with healthcare, I'm going through it's not anonymization, it's not masking, it's not this, it's entirely fictitious data that just happens to look like it came from your original data from a metadata perspective. Well, how do you do that? You know what? Why don't we hold a hackathon and we'll have student teams build methodologies for an internal agentic service that you can adopt and you can build your own. And they said, okay, we'll take that. And so we did it last week in 7 teams, and they were kind of blown away. And so now they are taking on teams to do knowledge transfer, and that's our next from a business school. We are trying to move into implementation, but implementation around AI isn't moving something they've built in. It's about knowledge transfer to teach the client to build it themselves, and that's the interesting piece. And then reconnect it to, well, we're having conversations about how do you reconnect it to the SaaS platform to validate synthetic data and things like that. Those are the interesting little nuances where this relationship continues to grow. Having Scotiabank as a flagship client in the hackathon makes it a much easier sell to hospitals, to consulting companies, to talk about this, because it just gives legitimacy to the initiatives that are underway.
Yeah. And so David, with the hackathon that just wrapped up, is there anything that jumps to mind? Like, what was the most impressive thing you think you saw?
And it's kind of what I touched on earlier, like the strategic thought that is, I always know that the demos are going to be great. Like, they build these, they're so slick. Like,
Yeah.
man, I'm so jealous. But the strategic thought and how they implement, and so, like, you know, they have 2 weeks. I give them a terrible data set, and they have 2 weeks, and they come up with these slick things, but they have to learn about banking. Like, they have to learn about risk. They have to learn about, they have to go out and learn these things. I'm still learning these things. I've been doing this for 26 years. So they have to learn that and then develop what they develop, right? And you know, the front ends are, and of course the back ends are limited, and it's a POC. But for me, it's that part. It's them learning the business first and foremost, learning about credit risk, which is not easy, and then learning how strategically how they're going to sell their idea. Like to me, it's just that depth of thought, I think, is it, and how much had to be done before they could even start building something.
Yeah.
We have a bit of a hack, though, to help with that, is that students are briefed that you act like a banking customer because you are one. You act like you're going to be a banking customer and a high-value banking customer because you may be one, and start to think about what kind of bank do you want to do business with and design prototypes that empathize with the customers to be the bank that you want to work with. And that's where they get some of that creativity, as they're really trying to think it through from customer journey, customer experience perspective. And then when they build from that point in, it starts to become, I think, kind of impressive because they're thinking through the nuance as though they really understand the customers. And we tell them, because you are a customer. And that's the nice thing about working with the banking industry and some of those other sort of industry areas.
Yeah. I guess the same goes for healthcare, right? I mean, if you technically will be a user of healthcare someday, so what do you want your healthcare to look like? We are kind of running out of time. I want to leave time for Q&A. Does anybody have any questions? Anything that jumps to mind? Okay. We were that comprehensive. All right. That's a great question. So I actually don't manage the team. So I pair a team up with a use case and a leader to own that use case. And that leader, usually a director, and usually I try and pick someone that manages teams effectively and has that experience, because we want to make sure that the students are getting something meaningful out of it as well, and they're getting the most out of their experience. And I find that if I match them up with more seasoned leaders, they're going to tend to get that. But they're managed almost like that director works for that. Like they work for that director, and even though it's offsite, and they'll manage that team as they would, and that team owns that use case, and that director, it's their problem. It's literally a problem in their world, so they understand what that problem is. Probably have an idea of what they want delivered. So it's really managed by the directors themselves, and each one's going to be managed differently. So Warren and I kind of manage it at the top, but the day-to-day is managed by professionals across GRM. So. Okay. Liz, yeah.
Well, it's the opportunity and it's the relevance. So by the time they reach April, when we run the hackathon, they've done 2 terms of case-based coursework. And so their choices are to work with clients on real issues and problems and apply the work, or do more courses that are case-based, reading fictitious scenarios about various things. I mean, that's our bread and butter, and I love it, but it sets you up to do better things. And they're up for the challenge, and we hope we select them for that reason, that they're up for the challenge and they want to be pushed. We tell them when they start the program, this is not a slow start. We're front-end loading the program. We're going to challenge you because we think you can do it. And then we continue to challenge them through the back end of the program. And so it's resonating. We were 18 teams of 5 a year ago. That's 90 students. We were 22 teams of 5 this year, 110 students. We've got 215 students. We're picking a window in April when a lot of students are returning home and all that sort of stuff. We're 2 years away from making it a required experiential program. So with that in place, now students will be really kind of working on multi-term experiential projects, and that becomes one of our differentiators as a business school. Christoph. So Christoph, initially it was me side of the desk. So David said he has a side job or a real job, and I have a real set of duties that I'm responsible for, but supervising these is really side of the desk for me. So I supervised 26 teams working on projects last year to the best I could. The student experience was great. The administration behind it was, hit and miss and spotty and that sort of stuff. I grade all of the reports that they submit in batch. But now that we've gotten it through the curriculum committees, we've got faculty assigned, we can slow down and do a better job of setting learning objectives, measuring learning objectives, and all this sort of stuff. And reflection. And reflection is a big part of these programs. The students stand back at the end of it and say, what have I actually learned about banking? Sure, but about transformation, about artificial intelligence, about managing and disruption and that sort of stuff. So but if it doesn't start with somebody doing something outside of their day job, nothing happens. And so if you can get enough success that you can bring it in and institutionalize it and then get better resources, and that's where we are right now with Ivy.
You're getting resources?
Well, we're hoping to get them from you, but
So, one more question over there. Sure. It works like an elective, and it works like stringing electives together. And what we'll do is, once we harden the process and as we mature, those electives get strung together as an experiential platform based on the client. So some clients want to do a hackathon and a POC and an implementation projects, and so really stretch it over 12 months. Other clients may want to go shorter and pick and choose. So that's where we're going to do with relationships, and then students right now are just selecting electives to keep going. But as I say, the idea is make it a milestone that they all have to take, and that becomes our differentiator. Is there a question over here?
A fun question. Can you share any examples of what the students came up with Fresh Eyes?
Want me to take that one?
Yeah, please.
Is that for me?
Yep.
So last year is a great example, and it's one that's still being worked on at Tangerine, but they built basically like an avatar that sits on top of the digital app, and then it'll kind of grow with you as your relationship with Tangerine matures. And so that's a really cool one that is now they're still working on getting that, and so I think that was like one of my favorites because it starts as an avatar, and especially if you're younger, and it kind of actually ages with you, and it and manages all your life well. So that was like a really cool one, and that was one of the ones that really inspired our leaders when we sold this idea. So that's probably my favorite one. So yeah.
Did you have a favorite one that you saw?
Well, I like them all, but I mean
They're not here.
My measure is more of how enthusiastic they are after the fact. And so, like I say, I do like the ones where they tell a hero story that some patient, customer somehow their life is going to be better because of some solution that they're pitching. And so they're really playing on the videos about how you're having customer, patient, user impact. And I like when they tell some really compelling stories about how people's lives are going to be different by virtue of these technologies.
Yeah.
It's funny, the one I think me and you were laughing is like it almost made you cry. They had this whole like
They put the heartwarming music
it's
up.
terrible.
It's
it was so good it was bad.
They really get sneaky on that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, they were
lean
pulling
into the
heartstrings.
cheese and you get the emotions flowing, right? We may have time for one more question. If not, that's okay. We can wrap up. Question right there?
Thank you very much for the presentation. I have two questions for you. First question is to you. How do you manage, when you have them in teams or groups, how do you manage your grading in terms of your, some will be slow, some will be quite good. How do you do that? And the second question is, which is a little bit different, sorry about that, is there any thought strategically into helping some of the students really moving forward with some creative ideas in the company?
So grading goes back to learning outcomes for these courses, which goes back to sort of where it sits in the program maturity. They do coursework, they learn frameworks and whatever. So I grade based on their ability to apply frameworks and think through methodologies. Interestingly enough, that sometimes means that students get great client feedback and not the grade they expect. And sometimes the opposite as well. And when they come and ask me about it, I tell them, clients are one audience and it's important to be able to satisfy them, but here's what I'm expecting for you out of the particular. And so we have that interesting conversation around what they perceive as, and sometimes as a bit of contrast or mismatch or that sort of stuff. So I'm grading back to our learning objectives for the program and go against that. And so students will produce a summary document, which may or may not be presented to the client about what they've actually learned. That's the reflection part. So that's what I'm more grading. The other question was?
How do you help them, for example, they come up with different creative ideas? If any of them wants to move forward with the idea,
Oh, okay. So that's happening. That does happen. It happened last week as well, where I have a client come to me and said, I want to buy that. I said, you can't buy that. What we want to do is, but there are some instances where not-for-profits, and we do a lot of work with not-for-profits, who say that if that was a service, a commercial service, we would subscribe. So now we're working with the Morissette Institute for Entrepreneurship on campus to start to think, how do we start to take some of these POCs and mature them into investor quality pitches that a not-for-profit could say, I've got donors who will spend money if they can have impact, and I, the not-for-profit, would like to ask my donor to fund this and have IP for students and a slice of IP, maybe even for Ivy, but for as sort of. So we're trying to work through models to commercialize and encourage entrepreneurship ideas really in the not-for-profit space. What we'd really like to do is put together a suite of offerings that we have developed that have been funded to be built in implementation, so we can make a difference in not-for-profit where they just don't have the money to do it, but we'd like to help. So that's yet another new frontier. We talked about that as having a library of POCs that would be available to commercialize if somebody wanted to invest in them. How does IP stay with the students? How do we do? It's the next wave of this.
Okay. I think that's it. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Warren. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.